Our notes are titled Lesson 4-1, Slope-Intercept Form. Today's date is 12/10/19. We are going to, I think I'm going to want to shift these. I think this, here it goes. There we go. That's the front page. We're going to do some writing underneath here, and then I'll go to the next screen, which should end up at the bottom of your page of doing examples. And then on the second page, we'll talk about going another direction on this. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. Now, in that, there's only two variables, and that would be the x and the y, okay? So, obviously, for it to be slope-intercept form, you have to have a y. If you don't have a y present, then you cannot use slope-intercept form. It would just be x equals a number, which would be a vertical line, okay? So you have to have a y present. Next thing, you got to have a slope, and that's what the m stands for. And then we need to think about what b is. B, if I get rid of the term mx, I just have y equals b. So b is actually the y-intercept. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in just a second. Okay, so what we're going to learn today is two ways. First thing we're going to do is learn how to graph using slope-intercept form. Second thing we're going to do is look at a graph and be able to write the equation in slope-intercept form. So those are the two things we're doing. So we've got, sorry, wrong thing. Don't say that. To graph using slope-intercept form. Intercept form. So first things first, we're going to take that b value, the y-intercept, and we need to write it as an ordered pair, because we want to graph it. So it must be written as an ordered pair. Okay. So when we're graphing, we have an ordered pair, so we're going to graph that. So we're going to plot or graph the y-intercept on the y-axis. Now we're going to talk about slope. So we're going to write the slope as a fraction. Because we want to use this idea of slope is the same as rise over run. And basically, the rise and run are going to lead us to another point that's going to be on our line. Okay? So we're going to start at the y-intercept. We don't go back to the origin. We start from the point we know is going to be on our line. We're going to rise up if our number is positive, or rise down if our number is negative. So I think I've mentioned this before. When I write my slopes, I always put my sign in my numerator. That way I'll always run right if I'm doing rise over run. Okay? So rise up if it's positive, or rise down if it's negative to the rise value, or the rise value amount. So if it says a rise of 3, I'm going to go up 3, okay? And then from that location, where I'm pausing after rising, we're going to run right, because that value should be positive, right? If I put my sign in the numerator, and then we're going to run right the run value. And then it's finally that time that you get a marker point. Once you have your 2 points, you're ready to draw your line. So you're going to connect the points and make sure you extend beyond the points and add arrow caps so that I see it's a line, not a segment. And when you're ready, you're going to be getting those little graphs out because we're going to be graphing on them. Now I'm going to switch to my next page. So here's where we're going to do our 2 examples. The directions are going to say graph using Slope-Intercept Form only. So when we take a test or a quest, probably in this grouping, we're going to ask you to graph different ways. And so we're testing that you understand how to do that. So you got to really pay attention to what form they're asking, or often the answer is being asked in a certain form. Okay, so you got to make sure that you are flexible with your forms. So this first graph on the left is going to go with this equation, y equals 4ths x minus 2. So a couple things to remember. If we're writing a slope that's a fraction, the x needs to either be attached to the numerator, or more often it's going to be directly across the fraction bar. Also remember that our slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is identify, I forgot my colors, green and pink. I'm going to identify my y-intercept. So I look at the x, and everything after the x would be my y-intercept. So I get b equals -2, which then I write as the ordered pair -2. And according to the notes, it says you're going to graph that ordered pair. So I'm going to go ahead, and at 0, -2, I'm going to graph a point. Okay, I'm going to use a little darker color. It'll show up better. Okay, then I'm going to identify my slope, write it as a fraction. It already is 1. So what this tells me is I'm going to rise up 3 from the y-intercept, and then I'm going to run right 4 from that new position. So what it looks like is 1, 2, a rise of 3 up, and then a run of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I mark my second point. So that took me to 4, 1. And so that's my rise of 3 and my run of 4. And then I go ahead and I connect them. And there's my graph. Second problem, not so nice. 3x plus 2y equals 6. The problem is it's not in slope-intercept form. What form is it in?
Standard.
Yeah, that's standard form, and that's not what we want. So we're going to go ahead and solve it to get it into slope-intercept form. So we're going to isolate the y term first by subtracting 3x from both sides. That's going to give me 2y is equal to -3x plus 6. And then I'm going to divide everything by 2. And now I'm in slope-intercept form, y equals negative 3/2 x plus 3. Okay. Now I'm going to identify my key players. So after the x is the 3. So that's my y-intercept. So b equals 3, which we're then going to write as the ordered pair 0, 3. And I'm going to go ahead and graph it. Now I didn't do it before, so I'll go back and do it, but in front of your x is your slope. So the x is kind of the breaking point between where's the slope and where's the y-intercept. And again, it already is a fraction. So what this is I'm going to rise down 3 from the y-intercept and then run from there to the right 2 places. So we're going to go from here and we're going to rise 1, 2, 3 down and to the right 2. And sometimes I end up hitting the x-intercept. Doesn't always work that way. And then I go ahead and I connect them. And when you're done, you're going to be starting to work on the second page. Okay, so on this side, we're going to determine the equation of a line that is graphed. And we are going to get that equation in slope-intercept form. So I abbreviate it S-I form. So first thing, we need to identify 2 key points on the graph. So the first key point is going to be the y-intercept. The second is a point with integer values. So on the graph paper, it's going to be a point that actually intersects the lines of the graph paper, okay? I'll say integer coordinates. So we're going to remember that our y-intercept is our b value. And then we're going to need to determine the m, the slope. And how we're going to do that is to do rise over run. Okay, so from the y-intercept to the second point, find the rise over run or slope. And the last is to substitute the b and the m into the slope-intercept form. Substitute the y and m values into slope-intercept form. We're going to go ahead and create the graphs. So the first one, I want you to mark a point at 0, 1 for the y-intercept, and another at 3, 0. So we have a x-intercept and a y-intercept, and then we're going to go ahead and draw the line through them. So all we need are 2 key players, a y-intercept and some other point with integer values. Okay. And then on the other one, we're going to go to 0, -1 for our y-intercept. And we're going to go to 4, 1 as the second point, and then connect them. So these would be graphs that would be given to us. So I'm going to work at the right side. So on this graph on the left, what is the y-intercept? What's the b value? Yeah, it's just 1. Okay. And slope. So we're going to go from that point to the second point. So I have two directions. I like to do my rising first. So in this case, I would rise down 1, which is -1. And I'm going to run to the right 1, 2, 3. And so that's my slope. Yes, ma'am?
For the second graph, did you say 4, 1?
Yes. I mean 4, 0. 4, 0. I said, but I drew what I wanted. 4, 0. Sorry about that. Then we're going to take those and we're going to create our equation. So we get y equals mx plus b. So y equals -1/3 x plus 1. I am going to tell you that sometimes you'll see this equation written this way because -1 times x is -x. But if you needed to graph, you would pull out the fraction and it would be -1/3, okay? Second guy. We want to figure out, and it's not always going to be an x-intercept and a y-intercept. Sometimes it's just the second number is someplace else. So we find our b value, which is -1. We take counting from there. We're going to do rise over run. So I'm going to rise up 1. So that's a +1. And I'm going to run 1, 2, 3, 4. So my slope is 1/4. So when I put them together into slope-intercept form, I get y equals mx plus b. Now notice there's a double sign there, so we're not going to write it that way. We would simplify it and say y equals 1/4 x minus 1. Okay, so that's what you guys are going to be practicing on your homework tonight.